We've won. Let me tell you, we've won. You know, you never like to say too early you won. We won. We won the bet. In the first hour, it was over. We did an excursion. You know what an excursion is? We had to take a little trip to get rid of some evil, very evil people. They're very strong. You know, they're going to try and take over the whole Middle East.
I think what an excursion is when you don't want to ask Congress to declare war. Joining me now is Dave Jacobson, a Democratic strategist, co-founder of J&Z Strategies, and John Thomas is a Republican strategist and managing director of Nest Point. Welcome, gentlemen. Good to see both of you.
Thanks for having us.
I mean, that's really what an excursion is, right? I mean, it's a war, but you can't call it a war. So what do you make of the politics of this? Because we have seen really low approval ratings for President Trump taking the country into this military conflict, which is different than what we've seen in the past when presidents take the country into war.
Well, I think it's because much of President Trump's base doesn't want any kind of foreign entanglements. And so the president was asking his base to trust me on this one. It's going to be fast. We're going to win and get right back to America First policy. So it is a little bit at odds, especially with some people in the Republican base, the Tucker Carlsons, et cetera, that just are anti-war at all turn. But look, there still is a large portion of President Trump's base that says, you did great job in Venezuela, and we're giving you some leeway and trust here that you're going to finish this job quickly and get back to America.
So you're saying the Democrats are never going to like him, but he doesn't even have all the Republican support on this, which is why that number is low.
And that's the issue.
And typically in the past, when we were less partisan, you would see the country sort of rally behind the president, but the Democrats don't have that sort of goodwill towards President Trump, right?
Well, I think that's the fascinating dynamic with this race, because when George Bush went into war in Afghanistan, according to Gallup, 90% of Americans supported that war. Less support, but 72% of Americans, according to Gallup at the time, supported George Bush's war into the war in Iraq. Now you've got a dynamic where you have a president taking America to war where more Americans oppose it than support it. That's jaw-dropping, and it's unprecedented in American history.
Of course, we had 9/11, which a lot of people felt like there needed to be a response, and there actually was a debate in Congress on both of those and an authorization of military force. So there was a different part, and it was actually declared as a war. Interesting, Axios has a story up called Inside the GOP Meeting to Save the House. And the GOP all got together and talking about strategies of what to do to win, John. And there's certain words that apparently you're not supposed to say anymore, including the idea of mass deportation. Do you agree with that? Do you think the war potentially could be a negative for you guys?
When you're talking just about elections, messaging, I mean, Dave gets this, messaging matters and how you frame things matter. Look, what happened on DHS is we started to lose control on the Republican side of the narrative. President Trump closed the border. That was a great thing. And Americans broadly want violent criminals deported. And so what President Trump's saying is, let's focus on the things that we know hit the high on the Richter scale and de-emphasize things that are creep on the message.
But it's interesting, mass deportations was such a part of the message. I mean, I remember standing on the floor of the RNC as people were chanting mass deportations, holding up signs that said mass deportations. That's been part of the strategy. What's the Democratic message?
Well, I think the challenge for the president, particularly in the wars, he was the guy coming in saying an end to all foreign wars or endless wars and lower costs. And what did he do? He started a war that literally is rising costs. Oil is now almost $100 a barrel. And the question is, how long is that going to last, right? Simultaneously, you've got Democrats winning back-to-back special elections. According to Down Ballot, Democrats have won the last 10 special elections of flips from red to blue. Republicans have not flipped one seat from Democrat to Republican since President Trump has been in office. At the same time, NBC just put out a poll, 60% of Americans believe that Trump is failing on the economy and the cost of living.
Okay, but here's what's interesting about what I just heard Dave say. He's right, but I haven't heard any message other than you're not Trump. Democrats really don't have a message that they're running on. That's actually a fascinating thing. They're riding the coattails of being against Trump and being against the party in power.
Is that enough?
Which I very well might be.
It is, though. Like, I'm literally doing races across the country where we are polling and fighting back against Trump and standing up to ICE is the #1 issue. It's right up there with affordability and tackling the affordability crisis. But fighting back against Trump is red meat for Democrats. That's why we're winning these races.
Certainly in a place like California, that seems to be the case. Speaking of California, President Trump talking about Governor Newsom and his book tour. Governor Newsom, in his book, writes a lot about the fact that he's dyslexic, something that he struggled with from the time he was a very small child, that he struggles to read a teleprompter, and it's difficult for him in certain situations. President Trump sort of mocking that. Watch.
He admitted he has mental problems, that he's not a smart person, that he has a mental lack of ability. He's unable to read a speech. He can't read. And I was attacked by a reporter that said, well, what's wrong with that? I said, nothing's wrong with it. But I don't want the President of the United States to have a cognitive deficiency.
Governor Newsom spoke about this himself on X, saying, I spoke about my dyslexia. I know that's hard for a brain-dead moron who bombs children and protects pedophiles to understand. So, tough words there from both of them. What do you make of the politics of this?
Well, talk about mental disabilities. I mean, Donald Trump on June 21 said that he completely obliterated Iran's nuclear facilities. And one of the reasons, the justifications for going to this war was to go after the nuke. So just raising that question. I mean, listen, in terms of the politics for Gavin Newsom, anytime he and Donald Trump are in a back and forth food fight is a win for Gavin Newsom as he heads into the 2028 presidential contest. He's been recently at either number 1 or number 2 in polls because he's leading the charge in the fight back against Trump. It's a message that's connecting with Democrats all across the country. That's why he's leading in the polls.
Is the idea of sort of mocking somebody with dyslexia smart politics?
It's disgusting.
Look, that's classic President Trump. He can't help himself, but the issue that's going to haunt Gavin Newsom is going to be his record, not his disabilities. But Dave's right. This is a gift from the heavens for Gavin Newsom right now. He needs to have a back and forth with Donald Trump and remain relevant. So the more the president's talking about him, Gavin's high-fiving his team going, this is great. The president's tweeting about me.
Well, and he just went on this big book tour. He's still continuing. We just showed some images of that. I mean, the book, he really gets into some very vulnerable spaces, talking about his affairs, talking about his mother's assisted suicide, talking about his complicated relationship with his father, talking about his inability to read and being bullied. And I asked him during a press conference today what that has been like for him going on the road, talking to people around the country and these big crowds about this very personal stuff. Watch. I'm curious how that experience of opening up in this space has maybe changed you as a man, and maybe the experience of talking about it maybe has changed you as a leader.
It's been pretty extraordinary, particularly talking about single moms. From single moms that come up to me after I talk about their own experiences with their mom or the moms themselves. And it's very emotional, particularly with mothers that show me their kids. They can be 40 or 50 years old. They can be 5 or 6 years old and literally tearing up. And it's just, it's a wonderful and cathartic thing to talk about people as people.
I mean, the challenge for him, Dave, sometimes is that people don't necessarily relate to him. And he talks about that in the book. They see the slick hair, the expensive suits,
He's from California.
The whole thing, the California, the wine, the French laundry, all the rest of this. Is this helping him politically to relate to people? Is it changing the dynamic for him?
I haven't read the book. I bought it. I'm going to read it.
It's a good book.
Okay. However, I do think that this is a smart strategy if you're campaigning for president in 2028. Work out the kinks early. Be an open book. Open yourself up to those vulnerabilities. Have those conversations early so that when voters are laser focused on the 2028 presidential contest, we are beyond that, right? So I think that's sort of the play of getting out early in this campaign.
Yeah, and he wrote this book actually years ago, and it's kind of been sitting there.
And I think the mom play is really actually quite brilliant because a key demographic in the Democratic primary are white single women.
No doubt.
And so for him to have something that he can relate to that corner of the base on is going to be useful for him as he positions himself for a presidential.
And I know not everything is cynical in politics. No. I mean, I think there is some genuine moments there.
Well, what we do is we like to find truthful things and then highlight and put those to the forefront.
Yeah. Right.
And these seem to be truthful things. He was raised by his mom.
Yeah.
And so he's drawing attention to that rather than him in posh wine parties and with the Gettys. And
well, because he lived these two very different lives. Most of his time he lived with his mother, who struggled financially, and then he spent time with his father, whose best friend was one of the richest guys in the world, and went on these crazy expeditions around the world. And he went back and forth throughout his life, which is interesting.
To me, that's the danger, is how does he get defined when he pushes off for president? Does he get defined as that Getty, posh, privileged Gavin Newsom, or does he get defined as somebody who battled his own internal demons and got raised by a single mom?
That's the point, is he's testing the waters with this early book tour. I think it's smart strategically.
Who do you think is the toughest Democrat that you could face right now?
It's not Gavin Newsom. As a Republican, I'd love to run against Gavin Newsom. I think his record fails when put to the test. And it may be popular to be anti-Trump, but I don't think the candidate.
So who is it?
Well, and I think
who's the toughest, though? Who would be the toughest Democratic nominee?
I don't know that candidate has emerged yet, honestly. I haven't been terribly impressed by the field. But if your entire basis for being is being anti-Trump, and when Trump's not on the ballot in 28, I don't know what you say.
Who's the toughest Republican to run against?
Well, let me just say, I think Gavin's challenge right now, because he is leading in most of the polls, is he does not want to be Howard Dean. Don't peak too early. You got to sustain that momentum throughout. I mean, listen, I think the real question is, like, is it going to be a MAGA sort of food fight between J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio, or are you going to see like someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene come in from, out of hiding, I guess, and then critique that MAGA movement and have a real debate among Republicans? Is this the direction we want, more doubling down of MAGA, or do we want to go in a different direction?
Yeah, it's a long time before we start that, and who knows what's going to happen between
Maybe
now
not
and
that
then.
long.
Yeah.
We're going to get there soon.
Dave Jacobson and John Thomas, great to see both of you, and clearly we're already ready for that debate here on The Story Is.